Hey guys, thank you for checking out the DDT Method podcast. I'm Drew Donaldson, and this week I'm sitting down with Brandon Eisenhower, also known as Biohacking You on social media. Brandon is a brilliant educator in the worlds of peptides and all things performance enhancement and really human being optimization. This is an amazing podcast where we touch on a number of different products, supplements, peptides, and we talk everything from performance enhancement physically to cognition and mental performance enhancement. This guy is a wealth of knowledge, and we'll be breaking down some really cool protocols that you guys can use to push yourselves not only in the gym, but in business and mentally as well. Before we get into it, I want to mention two quick things that I've been working on. At least I'll mention them quickly. They're not necessarily quick things because there's a lot of information there. But I do want to mention two of my projects that I've been working on. First of which being for anybody that's been interested in working with me, I did announce a while back that I've closed my books for one-on-one coaching. Well, I've done that so I can dedicate my time to launching Real Primal Human. Click the link below if you want to look into coaching with the Real Primal Human system. I have a team of amazing trainers and coaches that I've hired and a system that I've built over 20 years of experience in this industry. And we are guaranteeing results for high profile, high impact individuals that want to optimize everything about their health and their performance. For anybody that wants more information, we have an amazing offer for you guys as well. And that is the DDT Method School Group. Now, social media in general has become a little weird in the last couple of years. And most of these platforms don't like it when I give you guys too much specific information. School, on the other hand, that's pretty protected from being shut down in a lot of those situations. So I can go in there and I can give you guys exact protocols, including dosages of different PEDs, supplements, compounds, whatever you guys want to learn about for any sort of situation. So I'll be putting protocols in there every single week. We do 2 content drops per week where I'll be putting in my personal protocols to use for specific situations, and explanations for things from peptide breakdowns and peptide just general information, profiles, stacks, everything like that, into general supplements, PEDs, and everything in between. If you guys want more in-depth information, including dosages, protocols, and very specific information on specific peptides and plans, check out the DDT Method School Group. It's an incredibly low cost of entry, and it's really just giving us the means to get you guys more information on a regular basis. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. Today, I get to sit down and speak to somebody that's very quickly becoming quite the authority in the world of peptides and just general human enhancement. You might know him as Biohacking You on social media, but today I get to sit down and speak with Brandon Eisenhower, and I promised him I wouldn't butcher the pronunciation of his last name, and I feel like I delivered, so we're off to a good start. But beyond me not embarrassing myself, we're going to dive into some really cool stuff today where you guys can learn absolutely everything about optimizing every aspect of your life. Because I found that whenever I put out any sort of question, poll, just searching for some sort of guidance on what you guys want to see on the podcast, you guys want it all. You want to optimize literally everything. You want to be bigger, faster, leaner, stronger. You want to be smarter. You want to have rapid firing libidos, all sorts of random, weird, crazy shit. But this is a guy that can deliver everything to you in terms of telling you how to optimize every aspect of your life. So get your pen and paper ready. Get ready to re-listen to this one. We're going to give you a lot of actionables that you can take and incorporate into your own plans. But before we get into the fun stuff, Brandon, you've exploded onto the scene in recent years. Give us a little bit of background on yourself, what kind of brought you to all this, and what is it exactly that you do? What type of people are you working with and why?
Yeah. So some of this, I like to keep a bit ambiguous, but I've kind of been able to be very behind the scenes in the peptide space and kind of, working for peptide companies, helping them with R&D, helping them grow. And so I've gotten a really cool kind of behind the scenes insight into the space. So that's been super cool to see all of that stuff, because there's a whole other world to peptides other than just the educational side of things. When it comes to the business side, the legal side, how the space is moving. It's always very interesting, and it really gives you a more full kind of grasp of things. So I've been really, really blessed to be a part of that. And the other thing I've worked on is my education site, and just the education side of things in general has always been a passion project of mine. So I have a team of researchers under me. We have one who is studying to become a cardiologist. We have one who's has his degree in drug design. So very smart guys working under me that I work with to kind of help properly educate people on peptides, nootropics, and biohacking, because it's a very simple space, but it's also a very complicated space, and there's a lot of stuff that gets easily skipped over. So I've kind of been very blessed and very fortunate to see the space and be a part of the space kind of from every single different aspect. And I've also been very blessed too to be able to work with a lot of guys and kind of see how they've responded to peptides, help them with their protocols and whatnot. So I've been all over in the space. I know frontward facing, I do the educational stuff, but also from a lot of behind the scenes projects, I've been very involved, which has been super cool and a lot of fun.
Awesome. And a lot of people that watch this podcast regularly, they've heard me say time and time again that it is the coolest time to be somebody that's heavily involved in this side of the fitness industry because it's unprecedented, the access to all the things that we have. The only thing that I keep equating it to is this reminds me of back when I was like 17, 18 years old and I was just getting into supplements. And at that point in time, you think that every supplement delivers 100% of the label promise, and you think you're walking into a GNC or vitamin shop and playing chemist and taking all these super PEDs and everything from vitamin E to whatever Muscle Tech just released is going to change your life and change your physique. But we're kind of in this world where we're not far off from that because these peptides, these small molecules, these things that we all have access to now, they deliver quite a bit. But the problem is anybody can be in the space that wants to be in the space, regardless of qualification or credibility. In fact, some of the most recent debates, things involving microdosing, things involving general application of different products and whatnot, these are massive industry-wide debates that are being sparked from one or two people that are just kind of like crapping on each other on the internet that just happen to have really big platforms. And it resonates like it's this actual big thing. So
Yeah.
there's all this information that's floating around, but there's also all this bad information, all this misinformation, and all of these people that, for better or worse, can influence the entire space with an Instagram post just because one guy doesn't like another guy. So
Yeah.
what I try to do here is really cut through and decipher the information by going to the experts and just pulling out of your brain, like, what do you like to do? What do you like to approach? How do you like to do it without the influence of the outside world? And sometimes we'll address what people are arguing about because it's a hot topic, but I want to focus on what you would do to optimize a human being. So let's start with like the low hanging fruit here. Let's go with just general performance. What's going to be something as far as maybe an introductory level peptide, small molecule, some sort of application to somebody? And let's assume that they're generally healthy. They go to the gym. They're in good shape. The avatar is maybe a 20, 30, 40-year-old male or female that knows a lot about this stuff. Maybe they kind of have abs. They're kind of jacked. Maybe they compete here and there, but they just want to start leveling up to the next level, so to speak.
Mhm.
Where do you start with them? Let's look at general performance health. Like, where do we go first?
Yeah. So before I start on that, I do want to comment because I think it's interesting what you said about the state of the space, and I think it's reflective of what we've seen on social media and kind of where entertainment meets science or entertainment meets education. It's a very interesting juncture because a lot of these things are like science at its core, research at its core is very boring. It's very complicated. It's very nuanced. It's not black and white. It's not clickbaity. But I think what happens is people kind of take it because it makes for good entertainment, and then they kind of will pick or they'll kind of present information in a way that'll get a lot of views, which I totally understand. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I've done it on some of my videos before. I mean, it's part of the social media landscape, but it does kind of, some of the debates and stuff muddy the waters because it's like this person said this dose, was the optimal dose, and oh no, he's lying to you. And it's like at the end of the day, this is a compound that we don't. I mean, it's been studied in rat and mouse models, or this is a compound that we haven't had a new study on in 30 years. So, a lot of it's very interesting because it's entertainment meets like science and education. And a lot of times with that, I think you run into a bit of an oversimplification of the science. And I think that can be a bit problematic and an oversimplification kind of in the name of entertainment. But I totally agree with you. I think it's a very interesting component of the space. But at the same time, I get it. If you're trying to grow your Instagram, it's not appealing to put, oh, this compound is kind of in the middle. It's like, no, this compound is useless or this compound will change your life. So I thought I'd get that out of the way because that's a very interesting comment you made. And I think it's something that's interesting to kind of watch unfold. But if I was dealing with someone and their very kind of genesis of their biohacking journey, say they're in a decent spot, but not a great spot. One of the biggest first things that I think I would do is I would, I would look into their mindset on things and see how they view the world and how they have their life set up. I think diet's pretty with things like ChatGPT, it's not perfect, but diet, training, exercise are all pretty straightforward. What I notice gets in the way of a lot of these kind of biohackers starting up early is their kind of mindset with a lot of this stuff is weird, right? They don't have maybe the most resilience mentally. They don't know how to kind of schedule themselves. They don't know how to sit down and work for 8 hours. They don't know how to, adhere to a schedule or create a schedule or properly utilize all of their days. So that's one of the very first things I do with people who want to be high performing individuals is I look at their schedule, I look at their lifestyle, even to the extent of like, who are you surrounding yourself with in your life? Because it's so small, but it's like if you live with a girlfriend or boyfriend you don't like, you work for a boss at a job you hate, and you're trying to out nootropic your way out of that, it's going to be impossible. So I really like to dig deep into their lifestyle and make those, necessary kind of adjustments. From there, I mean, it really depends on the person, right? So anything cognitive, I like to kind of give them the just basic building blocks for cognitive performance. Upregulate the choline system, give them things that support neurotransmitters like L-tyrosine, and kind of slowly ramp up their stack with the idea that, again, if their goal is, to be cognitively at the next level, the goal is you want to be able to outwork the average person without any nootropics just because your lifestyle's so locked in. And same thing with weight loss, same thing with muscle building. You want to be able to lose weight better than the average person with as minimal stuff as possible. So that way, when you do put in the stuff, then you're going to absolutely blow it out of the water. So I always like to start with that very simplistic approach. And then I like to support the body from its own natural processes. Like I said, give it the building blocks. And then from there, we'll kind of make it more and more aggressive. And depending on the client, I like to, if a client's really locked in, and if they're the type of client where, I see that they're the entrepreneur that adheres to the same schedule every single day, those are the types of people. And I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but those are the types of people where it's like, okay, you want to go take these 5, 6 nootropics and peptides, go for it. You've kind of earned it. You deserve it,
Let's zero in on that high achieving entrepreneur, that individual that is looking for optimization. Let's look at it from that lens. Because I do agree that I think approaching things from, first of all, a foundational level, and then looking at their mindset, and then looking at their schedule and finding out how to actually piece together everything that you might need to interplay there in order to drive that further, that's a great starting place. Because if, let's say, somebody wants to do it all, have it all, be optimized on every single level, it really starts with being able to master your schedule, being able to accomplish tasks, being able to learn, being able to pull those memories up quickly. Recall is incredibly important. So that's even going to aid you in your physical journey, because if you can't figure out all your shit and you can't execute, you can't grow your business, well, you might not be able to afford to go to the gym in the first place or to buy all the stuff that you want to buy in order to keep this process going. So what's your process? Because the reason I start with that is there are so many nootropic compounds, from natural aids and precursors to stronger peptides. You have everything from your dihexas to your cerebrolysins to, like you were mentioning, things like as simple as tyrosine and whatnot. And I know it's going to be case specific because some are dopaminergic, some are more calming, some are all over the place. So without me getting too far ahead of myself, what's your process to figure out what somebody needs to really dial in mentally? And then based on the direction you go, what are some of your favorite tools?
Yeah. So a lot of that definitely comes down, again, like you mentioned, person to person, a very individualized approach. With that being said, we'll kind of set the parameters that this person is fully locked in. They do everything right. And then they come to me and I'm like, okay, perfect. So the first thing is we kind of see like, where are they struggling, right? Because if a person is super anxious and they suffer from anxiety and they're so stressed about their new business, putting them on a bunch of stimulants or modafinil or whatever isn't going to be very helpful for them. You want to address the anxiety. Or if you have a person who's lower on energy, then you want to focus more on the energy side of things. Or if a person needs help, maybe they're in a very sociable job where they need to be, very social all the time and that burns them out, then you kind of focus on that pathway. So the first thing is kind of, addressing that. But on a more broad level, what I like to do, and again, this is for context, this is for the high level entrepreneurs, is I kind of like to set up stacks where, again, we're supporting our neurotransmitters with, like I said, the choline upregulation, we're using the L-tyrosine. We're kind of using the basic building blocks for stuff. Your hormones are good, which is very important. If you're someone who's on TRT, I think HCG and HMG, because of the neurosteroid supplementation, makes a massive difference in terms of nootropic performance. Because again, those neurosteroids that you don't get from just pinning testosterone play a huge role in your cognition. And so I like to make sure all of those are optimized. And then I like to put in what I call the long-term players and then the short-term players. So I'm always honest with people, when I say this, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a heavy workload, or if you're a CEO and you have a heavy workload, I always say, hey, you don't want to do this long-term probably, but the reality is nothing beats a powerful stimulant 2 to 3 times per week for your heavy workload days. That's just my opinion. I know everyone wants to, talk about the ultimate Adderall replacement stack. I'm not saying go use Adderall or modafinil, but I am just honest when I tell guys, hey, if you want to be high performing and if you have these crazy days, you need somewhat of a short-term stimulant strategy. Again, with the knowledge in mind that you don't have any pre-existing heart issues, you're not also blasting gear on top of that. But the short-term strategy is huge because you need something that works now. Now, on top of that, what I like to do is I like to then layer in longer term strategies, right? So I like to throw in the things like Dihexa, the Cerebrolysin, maybe, the donepezils or the galantamines that are going to upregulate the choline system over the long term, or sigma-1 receptor agonists are going to upregulate the system over the long term. And that way, in the short term, you're still performing very well. You're supporting your neurotransmitters, you're supporting your systems, but also in the long term, we're building up the brain even better. So maybe that Cerebrolysin or maybe that Dihexa doesn't kick in on week 1, but 5 to 6 weeks, into your journey, you're like, wow, my memory is so much better. My cognition is so much better. So I always like to structure it from the long term, building the brain, and then the short term, hey, what do we realistically need short term to make sure you're still getting stuff done? Because a lot of nootropics in the short term can be a bit underwhelming. And so that's why I like to have some sort of short term strategy in place.
So let's focus in on 2 of the things that you just mentioned, just because they tend to be a bit trendy, but at the same time, very misunderstood. And that would be Dihexa and Cerebrolysin. Because you look this information up, you throw it into ChatGPT, you start looking through forums and whatnot. You're getting a lot of anecdotal report of a lot of cool stuff happening. And then, like anything else, you're getting people freaking out about potential side effects or unknown risks long term and whatnot. Let's break those down a little bit. So let's start with Dihexa. What is that, and how do we leverage it, and what for what issues?
Yeah, so Dihexa is going to be a nootropic that works through the hepatocyte growth factor. And, again, when you're in the research world, you always know how, what's said on a study doesn't always translate into the real world. But it's supposedly, I think they say 7 times more powerful than BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's a very, very powerful molecule. In fact, it has low oral bioavailability, but it's powerful to the fact that hepatocyte growth factor is powerful to the fact that I probably wouldn't even inject it myself, just because it's such a powerful pathway and it's growing so many things. In fact, again, people think and theorize that it could be so powerful that if you have an existing brain tumor, it's going to speed up the growth of that just because of how powerful of a growth factor it is. But basically, that hepatocyte growth factor pathway is going to, allow for kind of the creation of a lot of growth to take place in your brain. So new neurons and things like that, which is good, but also you don't want it to be in unchecked process, right? For various reasons, which I think is another thing people don't always understand with peptides and side effects, is a lot of these things, whether it be angiogenesis or certain growth factors, they don't really have side effects that you can visibly see always, or even see on blood work, but they're not processes you want to just leave flipped on all the time, right? Because the body has certain mechanisms for these things, and there's certain problems with just leaving them flipped on. But long story short, a very oversimplified version, the hepatocyte growth factor that Dihexa works through is going to allow for a lot of growth of new neurons and stuff in the brain, which is going to allow for, better memory consolidation, better verbal fluency, better cognition, all of those great things. And again, it's a great tool. It's something to use, long term. I don't get a great same day effect from it. Some people do. The other one that's really great that you were mentioning is Cerebrolysin. And I know that's one that's been kind of debated on. Some people, I know when Leo talked about it, everyone loved it. And then it was like when Leo passed, I don't think intentionally, people are kind of like, I don't know if I like it as much anymore. That's another one that's fairly misunderstood, I think, too. Of course, that one's taking kind of all the neurotrophic factors from a pig brain, and then it goes through the process, and then it becomes a medication. But that's also something to note. I probably would never use underground lab cerebrolysin. That would scare me. Um, there's proposed side effects with it. I know people talk about, certain potentially autoimmune response issues and stuff like that with it. But I mean, it's been a medication for so long. That one is very good for inducing neuroplasticity and kind of helping to. I always say that one's really good for helping to fix and heal the brain. So if you've ever abused anything recreationally, stimulants, if you're in a state of, anxiety and you want that neuroplasticity to kind of break yourself out of it, because if you think about a depressed person, all they can think about is one path. My life sucks. There's no way to fix it. And that neuroplasticity is going to give your brain the ability to kind of mold around a more situation and allow you to kind of work past it. So very good for those people, very good for people with anxiety, and also very good for people, again, to kind of heal the brain and upregulate how well the brain works in the long term. The main issue I tell people is, even if you're a seasoned bodybuilder, the pinning schedule with it is insane. I mean, you're talking, 10 mLs a day for 7 days, followed by, 5 to 10 mLs per week as like a maintenance dosage. So be ready to pin with that one. But it's not, I think the issue too is people think cerebrolysin is like the ultimate nootropic because they're pinning so much. But again, it's another one where it's like you're going to be getting the long-term effects from it.
So would it be accurate to say that the difference between the two would be Dihexa drives brain performance by letting you gain the ability to learn more or perform at a higher level cognitively, whereas cerebrolysin is more maybe rejuvenating and restorative to the brain? And if that's on track, can you take them together?
You could, in theory. I don't think there'd be anything wrong. I mean, it'd be a lot of, you'd be inducing a lot of probably neurogenesis in the brain. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. I mean, how I use personally cerebrolysin myself now is for that brain rejuvenative. I can't say the word. Rejuvenization.
That works.
Maybe I need more nootropics this morning. Yeah. But yeah, that's how I've always liked it. Anytime I do, and again, I don't want to over delve into this, but anything I do, recreationally, or if I put stress on the brain, or if I put stress on the brain, maybe again, you're starting up a business and you were abusing stimulants for 6 or 7 months, and you're like, oh my goodness, my brain is messed up. That's when I really like to use cerebrolysin. Dihexa, I think what you said is true, is more of, that maybe your brain's not messed up, but you want to just upregulate, you want to grow new neurons and all that stuff. I think it's a little bit better for that. And it also doesn't have to be injected. So it's more applicable kind of for the average person, probably.
Gotcha. Now, going into some more short-term or more performance aids on the cognition level, you mentioned anxiety before. And I think in a world where most of us in the coaching space, the entrepreneur space, looking at it through the fitness industry lens a lot, because that's a lot of the people that are watching this podcast, I think a lot of people that think that they're after these stimulants and these Adderall replacements and modafinils and whatnot, not to say that those are bad products, but I think a lot of the people that are searching for them are actually suffering with more performance anxiety in a work-related way. Because I talk to a ton of my peers that have issues where workload piles up and they just get overwhelmed, and you got 40 emails to answer and each one might take a minute, but it looks like this insurmountable task, and then they end up not starting till 10 o'clock at night. Then they're stressed because it's too late to start, and then they have continued ed, and then they have all this stuff going on in the background. It's like, I can be as organized as I can be, but I might still feel overwhelmed. And this is something I used to deal with in the past, and I was able to kind of work through it just by creating an operating system that allowed me to navigate it. But for the people that just can't climb out of that hole, what type of substances, without rushing them to stimulants, because that's not the right option, obviously, what can they use? What's at their disposal to kind of like calm the noise, but still give them that ability to focus and execute?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think anxiety is a huge issue that kind of gets pushed down a lot in the biohacking space. And earlier, I know you're talking about how to become the complete version of yourself, but for a lot of people, it does start with anxiety. Even in the bedroom or cognitive performance or whatever, anxiety is always the ultimate kind of killer of performance. So, and naturally, if you want to be a high performing, high achieving coach or a high performing, high achieving person, you're going to have a lot of anxiety and you're going to have a lot of stress placed on you. So I always like to say the thing with anxiety though is tricky because the systems that we can use for anxiety are oftentimes very fragile. For example, the GABA system, in the short term, you can do things for your anxiety, and you can take a phenibut or some of the Russian anxiolytics, or you can take whatever and go through your GABA system, and it works. But obviously, the GABA system is very very fragile and something that downregulates really quickly, and it can be hard to get it upregulated sometimes. So I like to kind of stay away from the GABA system. What I do like to do for anxiety is I like to do a few things. So one, I like to induce some sort of neuroplasticity. I think that's very important. Two, if the person responds well to it, I know it's hyper controversial, but I do like to work through the serotonin system because I think it's a bit more of a sustainable system than the GABA system, even if it doesn't feel as good in the short term. In the long term, a lot of times the serotonin system is a more sustainable system. It's very misunderstood, I think. So neuroplasticity, work through the serotonin system. And then I also too like to implement some things that maybe block some of these excitatory neurotransmitters. So like your memantine is a really good one, that blocks the NMDA receptors, the glutamate in your brain. And that can be good too for helping you calm down. CBD is good. And the other thing too I would do is, again, maybe you have, again, a very careful, very cautious short-term strategy where you're like, wow, this Friday, I have the biggest presentation of my life. I'm going to take a little bit of phenibut or a little bit of, edifoxine or whatever it may be and go through my GABA system. That is something you can do again, but you have to be honest with yourself because the problem is some people will take these and then they find an excuse to take them every day. But again, I really like long-term neuroplasticity, serotonin system blocking certain excitatory neurotransmitters. Short-term, 1 to 3 times per month, you have some sort of GABAergic compound that you like to throw in for high stress days. That is well justified. The other one that I know is popular in the space that seems to be pretty innocuous, although it does seem to work through the GABA system, is going to be Selenk. I know the Selenk nasal spray is really good. In theory, maybe it does, if you were to abuse it, cause some sort of downregulation or some sort of issues. The mechanism of action is still a bit muddy on that one, I think, as are a lot of the things from Russia. But that seems to be another one that in the short term can be very beneficial for, a few sprays of a Selenk nasal spray can be very helpful during a stressful day, just to kind of take a step back and, see things from a non-panic mode and say, okay, yes, I have a lot to do today, but if I do this, this, and this, I'll get it all done, or at least do the best that I can.
I've found that Selenk has been incredibly beneficial for exactly that. So it kind of just quiets the background noise and all the other thoughts that are kind of spiraling off of whatever I'm trying to focus on. It just kind of gives me the ability to take a step back and just go, okay, and just not get my attention pulled elsewhere without that stimulant effect. So I love that suggestion. Let's give some people that low hanging fruit that they're after, even though, there's going to be a chance somebody's going to overdo it. And maybe it's somebody that shouldn't even be doing it in the first place. But what would you say is the ultimate Adderall replacement?
Uh-oh. It's funny because I just made a YouTube video about how there is no Adderall replacement. But okay, so it is difficult because I think a lot of these compounds are very misunderstood by people, and I don't want to diatribe about this too long, but I know, in our space, I think there can be a bit of bias towards things that are, medications versus peptides versus research chemicals. And what I always try to tell people is that at the end of the day, peptides are, compounds developed by these same companies that are going to eventually one day, if they get through the proper channels, become medications. And it's the same thing for a lot of these nootropics, right? NSI 189 was made by a pharma company for it to be an antidepressant potentially, and it didn't make it through trials for whatever reason. But I always tell people, when it comes to these things, don't ever rule something out just because it's a medication, or don't ever rule something out just because it's a peptide, or don't ever rule something out just because it's a natural supplement. They all kind of have their place. And I think those biases that exist from different groups can sometimes muddy the stack. The thing with Adderall is that it's such a powerful stimulant. It's hard to come up with an exact replacement for what you can do from a pure work output perspective. you can of course throw in the things like the modafinils, and I think it's a bit cheating on the question to just say, well, replace it with another powerful designer stimulant like a cyclazidone or something. What I will say is that if you feel like you want to find an Adderall replacement, I would look into fixing your dopamine system. Number one, make sure that you don't actually have ADHD, because if you go to a good psychiatrist and they, say you might have it, that's opens up a whole nother thing. But if you really don't have it, you really feel like, hey, I'm struggling and I want the drive, I want the motivation that I would get from something like Adderall. Um, I'm not getting it. I would do probably two things. For the energy and the output side of things, I would probably have some sort of mitochondrial based peptide stack. So the MOTCs, the SS31s, all of those. And that's going to give you the energy side of things, the ability to work and to kind of power through things without getting tired or feeling lethargic. And then I would also look to correct the dopamine system. So I probably would do a dopamine fast, meaning you cut out highly dopaminergic activities. And then I would look into things like 9-MeBC is by far my favorite. That's one that's been shown to kind of help to correct the dopaminergic system. It's also a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And so that is one of those things where if you dopamine fast, if you take something like 9-MeBC, you can take the bromontane for the increased tyrosine hydroxylase, you take some tyrosine, maybe, with that stack, and I don't want to make it too comprehensive, you even potentially antagonize your dopamine system through something like LTHP. That's another strategy. And then you also drive neurogenesis. And you do that for, a course of, 2 to 4 weeks. After that, you'll notice your stimulants work better. You're naturally just much more motivated to go get stuff done. And you have a lot more natural reserves kind of dopamine to use. So a lot of times people who are searching for Adderall maybe have a motivation issue, maybe can't get themselves, motivated to do things. And so if you genuinely don't have ADHD and you want an Adderall replacement, I'd say don't look for a true Adderall replacement. Look for a strategy that's going to give you the energy to work longer hours, and look for a strategy that's going to sustainably upregulate and increase kind of and optimize your dopamine system.
So, without giving anybody specific advice to do this or to dose it a certain way, are you saying that the combination, the polypharmacy of a 9-MeBC, a bromantane, and an L-tyrosine would be kind of like synergistic to reset that dopamine system, or are you saying to choose one of them?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So again, you definitely want to try them all out individually, but those are definitely key components for a effective stack at kind of helping to repair and helping to kind of improve how well your dopamine system functions. And you feel it. I mean, 9-MeBC, I always explain to people, like, it's very powerful because it's like when you take it for 2 weeks regularly and then you go and you come off of it, you notice, wow, like little things make you much happier. You're much more motivated. You're much more ready to kind of start the day. And it's much more subtle, but it's still there. You're just kind of getting stuff done. Adderall is very in your face. You're like, I need to go power through this. The stack I just mentioned is much more subtle, but it's also much more, sustainable as well. So that's kind of why I like it. And yeah, I do like to kind of stack those together, especially in injectable L-tyrosine. It works really, really effectively.
Now, how are the two looking outside of or not looking at the L-tyrosine right now? How are 9-MeBC and bromantane working differently?
Yeah, so bromantane is going to be increasing something known as tyrosine hydroxylase, which is a process that, again, tyrosine it's a process that in the body goes into the building and the kind of creation of dopamine. So that's why that plus tyrosine is a good stack to have. I believe bromantane also has some adaptogenic properties. It's a very unique molecule, actually, because I know some people get a good like a good calming sensation on it. Also, too, I would say I found the nasal spray to be more effective than the oral, which I find that with a lot of nootropics. 9-MeBC is another very interesting one. Again, it's going to be a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So if you're taking anything like an antidepressant or anything, be aware of that because it's going to be inhibiting the enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters in your brain. And that one has been kind of shown to be much more kind of, I don't even know if it's a word, but neuro restorative of dopamine neurons and kind of the dopaminergic system much more directly.
Gotcha. So let's say like a two
Yeah.
week course or something like that, and you're saying potentially something in the background. Is that where we can readdress the Dihexa or the Cerebrolysin?
Yeah, and so with those with the things that are directly fixing the dopamine system, having something like a dihexa or cerebrolysin to kind of drive the neurogenesis is makes the stack even more efficacious and even better. The only thing with 9-MeV-C I would say is be very careful of sunlight. It makes you very sensitive to sunlight.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So
Yep.
sometimes, obviously, we'll have to look at, or not sometimes, every time we'll have to look at all these potential side effects and interactions with other things. I'm also assuming we want to minimize stimulants and whatnot during this time because that would be kind of
Yes.
counter regulatory because now you're throwing in a bunch of stuff to drive the dopamine system at the same
Mhm.
time. So,
Although I will say stimulants and 9-MeV-C are very fun. It very much so potentiates stimulants, but that does defeat the purpose of the stack.
maybe if
But
you have a long day,
yes.
maybe if you need to get some more work done in the
Yes.
background.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, before we move away from cognitive into physical performance enhancement, I do want to circle back because you mentioned something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but mechanistically, how these things work, it's 1,000% true. And I'd like to get a little bit deeper on it. Is you mentioned that somebody that's potentially using, anabolic steroids or hormone replacement or whatnot, that's not leveraging in an HCG and or an HMG, they're missing out on something that could be driving their cognitive performance in and of itself just by having testosterone without anything else going in there. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So essentially, I mean, creating testosterone is a top down process, right? So there's an LH, you have your LH and your FSH kind of pulses, and it downstream. There's a bunch of hormones that are made, and then you kind of get to your testosterone, you get to everything else. It's a very oversimplified, a very basic way to put it, but for the sake of this, I'm sure it'll work just fine. And essentially, when you just go and when you just pin testosterone, you're getting testosterone, but you're not getting the other parts of the process. And one of those parts you're not getting is kind of the creation of these neurosteroids, right? And some of these neurosteroids, things like progesterone and stuff, they have a very good anxiolytic kind of calming effect. So a lot of guys who are on testosterone or on gear have trouble sleeping. And a lot of times that comes down to insufficient amounts of these neurosteroids. Because again, not only are they neuroprotective and helping to protect your brain from certain ailments and neurodegenerative diseases, but a lot of times too, they play an important role in kind of developing your psychology. So some of them, like I said, are very calming or very anxiolytic. And so you need those. And if you just have testosterone, which is a strong kind of sympathetic driver, you're going to run into issues, right? And that's why I think a lot of guys have trouble with sleep and stuff is because they don't have that full neurosteroid cascade. So reality wise, I mean, if you're in the space, HMG is expensive, it's a pain. Uh, you're probably well off with just HCG, but I will say if you can do both, it's very, very efficacious. And you really, I mean, you notice it. You feel much better cognitively. You feel much better actually too in the bedroom. Like there's a lot of benefits of being on HCG and HMG together, or even just HCG solo.
So, not speaking in absolutes, because we all know to try not to do that, would you say that
Mhm.
any male on hormone replacement should probably be leveraging at least some HCG year round?
Definitely. And I mean, the other piece of it too is there's the whole desensitization piece of it. HCG mechanistically works through a kind of signaling pathway in the brain that is more predispositioned towards desensitization, meaning your brain becomes kind of desensitized because HCG is creating that LH pulse and HMG is kind of creating like they're telling your body to create the pulse. So some people theorize that if you just sit on HCG year round, you're desensitizing yourself to that pulse. So when you really need HCG to maybe you want to have a kid or something, um, you might be kind of screwed. Now this is just a theory, and actually, interestingly enough, if you were to take just regular recumbent LH, it works through a not as desensitizing signaling pathway. But yeah, that's kind of the concern with that. So what I would do is I would probably do HCG, a month or two on, take a month off, and then you can do just a DHEA and pregnenolone supplement. But again, I mean, it's hard because it's not a for certain thing, but I would consider the potential desensitization from the HCG if you're someone who's going to be on it for years and years and years, and then you're like, I'm on HCG for 3 years, now I want to have a kid, and now I really need the fertility side of it. There is that theory, that kind of working theory, that it might cause some sort of desensitization.
Well, at least being aware of that will empower people to make the correct decision. I do agree with you, though, that I feel like these things should be leveraged, if for no other reason than the risk to reward ratio is in no way problematic. So we're not really looking
Yeah.
at a lot of extreme chances of something horrible happening from HCG. So I do think that's something a lot of people can benefit from exploring. Shifting gears a little bit more into physical performance and body composition, aesthetics, and everything like that, because that's what everybody else is here for. Let's
Of
start
course.
with something that you already mentioned. And the mitochondrial peptide craze is probably one of the things that's getting the most traction on Instagram, on YouTube, and whatnot, just because it works really well. You can take these things and not
Mhm.
even know what you're doing, and in a lot of cases, see some sort of result yielded therefrom. So let's start on MOTS-C, because you mentioned that one. MOTS-C, profoundly powerful peptide. I mean, banned by WADA, and it's got to be banned for a reason, at least you would think so. Break
Yeah.
down for me, what is MOTS-C and how can we leverage it for performance enhancement?
Yeah, so MOTS-C is kind of it's part of a family, and I believe they're called like mitochondrial derived peptide. It sounds like I'm probably making up that name. Maybe I'm butchering it, but it's part of a family of peptides known as the kind of mitochondrial derived peptides. And I mean, what a lot of these are doing are essentially kind of making your mitochondria work better, or they're upregulating it in some capacity. And again, this is very oversimplistic, but one of the reasons and one of the beauties of MOTS-C as a compound, and I think a lot of these in general, is that they're so just complete as compounds. When you talk about becoming the complete human and kind of the complete version of yourself, and you have something like MOTS-C, well, you're getting better weight loss. You're more insulin sensitive, your cardio gets easier, you're performing better, you feel like you just have this unlimited, natural, very clean energy, which is far better than anything like even if something like Clen does give you energy, it's a very synthetic, very overly stimulating feeling. MOTS-C gives you this great clean energy. Mentally, you feel better. Again, you're losing weight better. And so I think really, with a lot of these mitochondrial compounds, and MOTS-C kind of stands out as one of my favorites and one of the best representations of this. I think the completeness of these compounds is why they're so attractive to people. I think a lot of people this summer probably had really good cuts where they felt they had great energy, they looked good, their training was going great because they were kind of, working in these, mitochondrial peptides. And I think again, the reason why they're so popular, MOTS-C included, is just because of how complete of compounds they are. They're not just building muscle, they're not just improving cognition, they're not just improving fat loss. They're kind of able to do all of those and do it all in a very efficacious manner.
They seem to be just making the entire system operate better, which is what's really cool. Now, looking at it though, MOTS-C in particular, just because it's been around for a little while and there's a lot of smart people saying a lot of smart stuff about it. But if you try to leverage, like, how am I going to take this? Or you look up what's the best way to apply this, you have everything from the Dr. Seeds protocol, which I believe is 5 milligrams 3 days per week for 3 or 4 weeks, and then 5 milligrams once a week for 3 or 4 weeks. You have people talking about 1 to 2 milligrams per day every single day. What's the
Mhm.
half life? How long is it in your system? And how would you idealistically set somebody up to take it?
Yeah. So a few things here. Number one, off the top of my head, I am not sure what the exact half life of it is. I will say though that I have heard, like you've heard, there are different protocols. And this is too, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if the conversation will take this turn, but there's another compound where I know the protocol and the dosing has become like World War III in our space with the SLU. But it's I've heard people have a lot of success using it both ways. I've heard the 5 milligrams 3 times per week. Some people swear by it. The 1 to 2 milligrams every single day. A lot of people love it. What I kind of tell people with dosing some of these things is I always, I like to work with them and say, for some of these things, dosing regularly is probably going to be better. But also too, I mean, from an adherence standpoint, because that's also a big thing in medicine and pharmacology. Like realistically, what are you going to do? Like, I tell my client, are you realistically going to pin 1 to 2 milligrams of MOTS-C, every single day. And he's like, well, no, I'm probably would probably do the 5 milligrams 3 times per week. I'm like, okay, let's stick to that. Maybe the 1 to 2 milligrams is even better, but also too, like, I think individual adherence and kind of individual situations kind of triumph over that in cases like this, where, I mean, it's possible we still don't even know what the exact optimal dosing protocol is, but I always like to take into account individual adherence to some of these things. Because again, I've heard people, and this is again where it's kind of the boring, not fun answer. People who take 5 milligrams 3 times per week, myself included, and have had a great experience, and from that, I'm kind of like, hey, realistically, I'm not going to go and pin myself with 1 to 2 milligrams every single day, even if it's 10% better. Like for me, it's not worth it. And again, I know people who are totally fine pinning and have great experiences on 1 to 2 milligrams per day, and it's better than the 5 milligrams. So it's a very boring answer, but when it comes to dosing, kind of dosing protocols with some of these things, especially the niche stuff, and I know MOTS is less niche, but it's still a little niche. I always like to kind of think about it kind of from that angle, if that makes sense.
So, do you think that the other mitochondrial peptides are potentially better tools, or does it all have to do with what can you take with the best adherence and what works the best for you? I know it's always going to be N of one, but what are
Yeah.
some of the other players that you would like to see somebody potentially introduce to make that cut easier over the summer or to drive performance more? So, because I know the buck doesn't just stop at MOTS.
Yeah. Well, I mean, SS31 has been one of my favorites, and I know that one got kind of written off. I didn't get written off. I mean, I think what happened is that in the data, it was used at very high dosages, like 20 to 30 milligrams per day. And I do think those dosages could be justified for things like correcting organ health. But with SS31, what I found, and again, this is very anecdotal, very N equals one, but I found that SS31 serves as a good primer for a mitochondrial stack. So what I always like to do is I always like to do something like SS31 as a primer. And then because SS31 is working through kind of correcting the cardiolipin, which is something that, if it's dysfunctional, it creates a ton of problems in the body, from the brain to organs to everywhere. So I always like to start with SS31. I like to do a little loading phase of that up. And I think that could be beneficial for a lot of people. And I found that helps to kind of potentiate my true mitochondrial stack, which then would involve, things like your SLUs, things like your MOTS, things like your methylene blues, and there's a lot of things you can add to upregulate mitochondria. It definitely gets to a point with some of my clients where, I kind of tell them, is there a official right answer of like, should I do MOTS and SLU or should I do MOTS, SLU, and methylene blue? I always say, hey, what's your budget? What's your experience like? And if someone has a high experience and a high budget, I do like to throw and kind of mix and match those compounds. Another kind of primer, though, I like to do as a basic rule of thumb is for things like SLU PP332, which are inducing the mitochondrial biogenesis. I do at some point like to kind of clear out, potentially senescent cells and things like that, and kind of induce some of that through things like the urolithin A, the FOXO4 DRI, and kind of have a protocol like that. So that way I know I'm at least, again, very theoretical and it's not that clear cut, but I also like to kind of clear out some of those senescent, maybe not working properly cells. And then I like to kind of correct the working cells with the SS31 and then introduce my mitochondrial stack, which is the MOTS, 5-amino-1-MQs, NADs, SLUs, all of those. But if you want a mitochondrial one specifically for weight loss, I think SLU PP332 is going to be something you need to include in your stack.
Definitely agree with that. Definitely agree with all of that. Looking back at the SS31 and the way it works, like you mentioned, binding to the cardiolipin and thus kind of like supercharging, or not really supercharging, I guess, increasing the integrity of the cell, making the cell stronger. I always try to explain to
Yeah.
clients it's kind of like putting an Iron Man suit on the inside of the cell wall. Now,
Yep.
when you do that, you're massively decreasing the negative effects of ROS on the cell itself. In your
Mhm.
opinion, with potential long term use or abuse outside of trying to fix a specific problem, is that borderline going to interrupt mitophagy or kind of interrupt the potential senolytic process of clearing out those zombie cells? Or is that something that we're overthinking?
Yeah. I think So with SS31, I think the logic makes sense. I haven't researched that specifically. I will say a lot of these bioregulator based compounds or peptides, anti-aging peptides in general, do interfere with certain cell death processes. Like I think Penelian, inhibits a process known as caspase, which is a programming of the death of cells. You have something like epithalin or epitalin, which is going to extend the length of telomeres. But the problem is a lot of these, compounds. Yes, they're extending or they're maybe rejuvenizing the cell and all that, but they're not very selective. So in theory, what you're saying is totally true. It's very possible and it's very plausible, I think, that you run into a situation where, hey, it's great, it's making your healthy cells very healthy, but it's also causing these unhealthy cells to stay in your system longer than they should. And it's very interesting because I think, even NAD, right? NAD inhibition is actually being studied in oncology, right? So cutting off NAD from cells, blocking it is being studied in oncology. So a lot of these anti-aging things that are kind of anti-aging from the cellular level and extending the lifespan of cells, I definitely think what you're saying is true. And it opens up the door to interfering with certain programmed, cell death that should be happening. Again, in theory, right, I think one of the best things we can do for that is running certain, Senolytic based protocols. I really like the Fox, and I think I'm saying this wrong, the FOXO4 DRI. I think that's a
Mhm.
very interesting, anti-senescent cell peptide, along with your urolithin A's and along with there's a lot of other senolytic based drugs and compounds too, depending on how intensive you want to get with your protocol. But I think what you're saying is totally true, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't even think about when they're running these protocols.
I think the unfortunate reasoning behind that is when you look at clearance of senescent cells and whatnot, it kind of loses the sexiness, so to speak, of some of these compounds and the reasons why we're taking them. But one thing that I've always noticed, and I definitely do want to mess with FOXO4 a little bit from everything I've read, it seems phenomenal when leveraged correctly. I've done a few courses. I think I've done them, God, every 4 to 6 months for the past like 2 years of really high dose Fisetin for like 3 days, like mega dosed to act as a senolytic agent. And I've always noticed, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just reacting poorly to the actual product, who knows? But while I'm taking it for those 3 days, by day two, I feel kind of run down, just a little kind of brain fog, groggy, and whatnot. But then for a few days afterwards, really for a few weeks afterwards, I feel rejuvenated. I feel fresh. I feel amazing. So I've been programming it around deloads from training, just very,
Mhm.
very light recovery based work, maybe some sauna use and whatnot, but nothing even too taxing or sympathetically driving on my nervous system. And I've always found that the week after that, if not the 2 or 3 weeks after that, like I feel like I'm fresh and ready to rock and roll, almost like I took 2 weeks off of everything. Is that just me or is there something going on there?
No, I mean, I think it's sometimes it's hard to isolate these things because I know even for myself, it's like when you go into like a protocol period, like when I was doing the FOXO4 kind of experiment, it was like, okay, I'm gonna only eat a fasting mimicking diet, and I'm gonna make sure my liquid intake is really good. And then it's like, okay, then after I'm like, I feel amazing. And I'm like, is this from the FOXO4? Is it because I was just really focused in on my health for the week, maybe more so than I normally am? I do think there is some truth to that though. And I have read, again, a lot of this stuff is very anecdotal, but I have read a lot of reports where people, after they do kind of senescent cell protocols of clearing them, they feel just a lot better, right? Old injuries that they've had improve, inflammation improves, they're sleeping better, they have more energy. So I definitely think there's some level of truth to feeling better after, and I also think there's a level of truth to feeling not great during the protocol. And I think that's something too that I've been trying to kind of communicate to people is that you got to think long term with some of these things. And just because something makes you feel good and energized short term doesn't mean it's always good. And just because something makes you feel maybe not great long term or doesn't make you feel great short term doesn't mean it's not good for you in the long term.
Gotcha. No, I agree with that 1000%. Pivoting a little bit more while staying in the performance enhancement world. One thing that we hear all the time, we know that the mitochondrial peptides are driving better performance overall, which can lead to building muscle, which can lead to rapid reductions in body fat, energy, and whatnot. We know the cognitive peptides and what they do, and we know all these little niche things. We know plenty about GLPs. We won't even get into that because that's a whole other podcast. But there's
Yeah.
so many different facets of so many different peptides that do so many different things. The one thing that I always get asked by somebody that's not directly in the peptide space, maybe they're more in the bodybuilding world, maybe they're more just the gym bro, gym girl, or whatnot that wants to get into this stuff a little bit more. It's always, what's the best peptide for building muscle? And generally, when I see that question asked to other people, they always go the GHRP or GHRH route because it's kind of like, well, the low hanging fruit is growth hormone and increases recovery and recovery over time. That's not really building muscle. It's kind of setting the table to
Yeah.
put you in a better situation to build muscle long term. But when people are asking that, they're asking about maybe theoretically, I haven't used them before, but how some of these myostatin blockers are supposed to work. They want peptides that work like steroids. And to my knowledge,
Yeah.
we don't really have anything that's doing that directly, but do we have anything that, in your opinion, can be leveraged a little bit more directly for actual hypertrophy and building muscle?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's funny because I knew before you said that was going to be the question because I know it's a very popular thing. It's kind of interesting because peptides do so many things that you would think there'd be some crazy muscle building peptide, and there definitely are. But I think it's a more nuanced conversation, of course. And I think the first thing I would say is that if you're not utilizing androgens in some capacity, I probably wouldn't hop on any of these peptides for building muscle. I don't think alone they're going to do anything super substantial. So I always tell people have some sort of base of androgens that you can handle. It doesn't have to be crazy, but have something, where it's like, hey, this works for me, this works for my body. And then what you can do is instead of adding in more androgens, you can add in these peptides. So right off the bat, I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, we won't even touch on the growth hormone secretagogues because yes, technically they will help with the muscle building process. But I think the IGF LR3 and IGF DES are really great tools. Again, there's a lot of issues with quality and storing them properly. So make sure that, of course, you're properly storing them and using them. They degrade really quickly, especially if you're not doing a little bit of acetic acid in there. But I've always said that IGF DES, IGF LR3 are two that I think are my top favorite peptides. IGF, I mean, they're similar. IGF LR3 though, with that longer half life, is going to be more intense, more higher level, more results. IGF DES is very quick, very in and out of your system. But I think those two are very good for kind of complementing androgen and kind of their ability to create, long-term muscle and kind of complement an androgen, even androgen plus growth hormone cycle. They have a lot of potential. They have a lot of potential to fit in very nicely. Especially, with those, the beauty is you can kind of take them for a short period, get in, get out with them and see some pretty good results. So I always like those two. A lot of the myostatin peptides, like the follistatin 344, there is, complications with those. Some of them need these viral delivery methods to really get into the cell. Some of them are very untested. I know it was an ACE-031 or something like that. Those are still so novel that, I mean, I think for the average person, I would almost say like, I don't think it's going to be a massive needle mover. And then the other one too that I've seen that I know people get excited about is the PEG, MGF, the mechanical growth factor, and then just the regular MGF. I know those two have a lot of potential, especially too. I believe the protocol is people are using them as kind of primers for their IGF LR3 and IGF DES protocol. So I've seen people have success with that on Reddit. I've also seen people say though that those did nothing for them. So I think they're very interesting though. They're very powerful, but again, the problem with that is like the average person asks, and I think as more average people get into peptide, or more, when I say average, I mean non-enhanced, non-hardcore bodybuilder people, when they ask those questions and they're like, oh, IGF DES, this is going to help me build muscle. And it's like, well, if you're a natural athlete, I mean, it'll help, but I mean, it's not going to be what you could achieve if you were pairing it with androgens and with GH in a very, kind of complicated, strategic, enhanced approach. But that's kind of my view on the muscle building peptides.
Right. No, and I agree with that 1,000%. We spoke a little bit off air earlier, and I'll be experimenting with a PEG MGF IGF LR3 protocol shortly here myself. And because again, like just like you, I've read a lot of anecdotal reports that people are getting good results from it. It makes sense to me on paper. Just looking at satellite cell recruitment and whatnot, seems like it could be something
Mhm.
that's really cool. Now, I know where I stand on this, but every single time that I bring up IGF to anybody or anybody asks me about IGF, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, it always gets
No,
followed up with what's the cancer risk? Is
I
that a
know.
thing? Because I know it ties into this IGF levels being correlated with cancer type situations, but I mean, I don't want to sit here and say, show me the bodies, because we all did that back when we watched Bigger, Stronger, Faster 15 years ago. Then people started dying shortly thereafter. But
Yeah.
are there issues with cancer, or are there theoretical issues with cancer likely based on abuse?
Yeah, so I think I it's a very I mean cancer to begin with is a very complicated thing, and a lot of these molecules what people kind of struggle with is they'll like ITPP, DADA, for example, potentially have some anti-cancer effects in the studies. But the thing is that cancer is so complicated of a disease, and it's really is I mean it's a combination of a bunch of different ailments and kind of pathologies. It's never like a one size fits all. But what I will say in terms of IGF, I mean, yes, if you have unlimited growth flipped on, you're going to be putting yourself in a position where if you have existing cancer, you're going to be essentially speeding up the rate of that cancer. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But the other thing is, and I say this about growth hormone too, if you look at, for example, if you take an HIV patient who has you know, potentially a very compromised immune system, and he has no immune system, that's going to also put him at a high risk of cancer. So then something like GH is actually probably going to be beneficial because it's able to help kind of recharge that immune system. So it's always very nuanced with it. I would say, you know, and the other thing too, I think that people kind of fall for is that there's some perfect cancer screening process. I think there's a company who does the MRIs. At the end of the day, I mean, you're never going to perfectly screen yourself for cancer, before using these things. I would always say though, with these things, keep them to limited periods of time. Don't have the growth flipped on all the time. And if you are worried about it, I would probably stick to just the IGF DES. I mean, the reality is that it's in and out of your body so fast that I mean, it's I don't want to say it wouldn't be problematic for cancer, but again, there's so many different conditions that would have to be met. And also too with the whole GH in cancer and IGF in cancer, like androgens also have a cell proliferative effect as well. And so it's kind of like, I mean, anything in the bodybuilding growth lifestyle is going to promote, faster cell division and whatnot. So yes, theoretically they could, and it's something to be like. If, for example, if I had cancer, I definitely wouldn't use them, but I probably wouldn't use most peptides. But also too, it goes past it because again, IGF and growth hormone and all that also play roles in our immune system, and the immune system plays critical roles in killing off these existing cancer cells. So in theory, yes, but it's kind of not the full story.
Gotcha. Now, before we switch off of IGF and kind of wrap things up a little bit, one thing that I have seen making the rounds on social media and discussion a little bit is different protocols using different types of IGF. So, not getting into stuff like Increlex, because realistically, nobody listening to this podcast really has a source for Increlex. Very few people do. Maybe they do. If so, call me. But nonetheless, if somebody wanted to take like a low dose GH and an IGF, would that be beneficial? Or what if they wanted to take like an IGF LL3 for systemic use and then still take some DES in the muscle group that they just trained or are about to train, albeit maybe lowering the doses of each? Is there a way to combine these with benefit, or are we just going into overkill now?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, this is all, anecdotal from just what I've heard from coaches and people who have worked on it. But what I have, from my understanding, there is a lot of potential for kind of mixing and matching your growth hormones, your insulins, your IGFs. Again, that's a higher level protocol. And I, of course, if you're using IGF-LR3 and growth hormone and you're using a pre-workout insulin as well, you want to be someone who's very in tune with your body and in tune with the compounds. But from what I've seen, there is a lot of benefit in mixing and matching those and really just capitalizing on that workout window during the day. And I theorize that's probably one of the best ways to build muscle in the most efficient way possible is to kind of come up with stacks like that can, help to drive from different factors. So yeah, anecdotally, a lot of people have had tons of success, and a lot of coaches have had a lot of success with the mixing and matching growth plus DES plus, whatever. There seems to be a lot of potential in mixing and matching those.
Awesome. Very cool. And I do urge anybody that wants to do that to don't let this be the totality of your research. Please
Yes,
go into it
yes,
a little
please,
bit
yes,
more. There's a
yes.
lot of people out there building protocols off of like one reel, and I'm almost hesitant to make a reel out of this part of the conversation because somebody will totally do that. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, we're just here to provide the information and the tools to begin somebody's journey or enhance it, no pun intended. And hopefully they go about it the right way. Brandon, this has been amazing, dude. We got so much cool stuff here that people can implement into their own programs and take action with right now. And that's what I really try to deliver on this podcast. Now, if anybody wants to deep dive more, which I'm positive they do, where can we find more of you, more of your information, your paywall website, your courses, your books? Where do I find all your stuff if I want to deep dive into this more?
Yeah, definitely. So I always like to keep it both ways. So I always like to do free plus the paid for stuff. YouTube, I have some good deep dives on there. Honestly, my Instagram reels are probably going to be a little bit more basic just because of how reels are set up. So if you are someone who wants the basics, Instagram's great. If you want the deeper dives, YouTube's great. If you want to kind of contact and be a part of the conversation directly, I have a WhatsApp group and a Discord group, which are great for kind of talking within kind of my community that I built up. And that can be found at biohackingyou.com under the kind of communities tab. I have everything linked. And then if you feel like you're someone who really wants to go to the highest level, I do have my paywall. I think it's like $29.99 a month. And on there, I have probably 13 ebooks. I mean, I say ebook loosely. I mean, they're like 10 to 15 page guides, but probably around 13 ebooks. We have probably, 40 to 50 hours of course video on there, very in depth. And we have over, 100 protocols and, basically everything you need if you want to go very in depth. So if that's you, I would go there. And then if you want just the more basic stuff or joining the communities, I would go to the other spaces. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate, you having me on. I really like to always have these conversations and these deeper dives because it gives you a chance to kind of, go past just the clickbait Instagram reel kind of things.
Exactly. Thank God long form isn't dead because we get to actually help people when we do this. And I do want to say, as a member of your pay site, since before you and I had ever had a conversation, I will vouch that 1000% it is worth more than every penny. So I urge anybody that's watching this podcast, please check that out because you will not regret it. There's a ton of information in there. Brandon, I would love to have you back in the future to deep dive into any other aspect of all things human enhancement. We'll let everybody digest this one because I'm sure there's a lot they're going to pull out of this one. So hopefully we'll have you back soon. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.